How's it going, guys? It's your boys, the REI Avengers. We have assembled, and we're going to talk about foreclosures today because foreclosures are up 115%. Repossessions are up post those foreclosures 67%. So you're probably seeing articles all over the place that are fear mongering. They are trying to feed you fear so they can sell you security down the line. All right. But let's take a deeper look at these numbers and figure out what's really going on here. So I have with me my two buddies, the Lumberjack Landlord. I got Dion from Dion Talk. And we're going to talk about the real implications behind the rise in foreclosures and maybe what's causing such a steep increase over the last year or two. So why don't we start with Matt? Matt, will you give us some of your thoughts?
I mean, yeah, so I see foreclosures are up, but I also know how foreclosures work because I was around in 08, 9, 10, 11, and 12. And I know that just because filings have started doesn't mean that actual possessions have started, number one. And number two, it is a part of the market, but it's not anywhere near even pre-pandemic norms. So while it's something to watch, this flood of foreclosures, I'm still waiting. I have some money. I'd like to have some more, and that's where kind of buying foreclosures comes in, but there aren't any really available. The only ones that I'm seeing are vastly overpriced homes where banks were dumb and they let people take out 100%, you know, and even then they had just done it in the last 6 months. And literally that person couldn't do math. And, it's massive exceptions to the rule is what we're seeing. It's by no means, by any means, is it anywhere near normal.
Yeah, and so a couple things that I want to hit on. First, we are going to look at some graphs here that show the historical foreclosure rates and foreclosure numbers over time. We're going to make some comparisons. Second, yeah, the reason why people are begging for foreclosures, the reason why people want them so much is because prices are so high. And it's even worse now that interest rates are so high. So people are hoping that if there's enough foreclosures, maybe it's going to flood the market with all of this inventory and drive prices down. And so that's what we're kind of discussing today. Is that actually on the horizon? So my question to Dion is also, we want to hear your thoughts on the same topic, but can you explain to us about forbearance and how that's played a bit of a role in the last couple of years worth of foreclosure data?
So that's one of the big metrics that's really different than 2008, right? You had millions of foreclosures. Then and some people on forbearance, and when they came off of forbearance, you had to come up with all the money all at once for every payment that you missed. And now, anyone on forbearance in the last couple of years, when you came off, they were offering you 40-year mortgages, the debt added to the end, all kinds of ways to not go into foreclosure. So when you have record low numbers like a moratorium where you can't do foreclosures coming off, we're going to see percentage increases. And believe me, winter is coming. This is why we have a crash. This is why these markets that I'm about to name have been impacted so bad by these massive increases in foreclosures. Columbus, Ohio, it's up 14.7% year over year. There's so many foreclosures there. Kansas City, that's a better one. That's probably in Kansas. Kansas City's not actually in Kansas, is it? No. So it's not. It's weird. Well, it's up. Oh, that's up 17.5%. Shoot. Okay, we'll go to Memphis, right? That's not Nashville. That's where Memphis. It's the music place, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Right. Well, they're down. No, they're up 47.3%. This sucks. So I don't know how this foreclosure, is going to happen. It's almost like real estate is freaking local. Like what's going on in your market? Some are down. Yes, they're going to get all of the attention. You're going to have foreclosure numbers coming up, still lower than normal, but coming up closer, right? So there's actually a reason why foreclosures are one of my 3 things in my auto searches that I don't want. So a lot of people are like, oh, yeah, there's probably going to be a lot of foreclosures, so prices are going to drive down. Well, let's say there was a massive flood of foreclosures. In 2009 and 10, banks were trying to offload them. Right now, a foreclosure can often become something like a short sale instead. So the 3 things I don't want when in my auto searches, I tell my agents I want no HOA, no short sale, no foreclosures. HOA for a long list of reasons, but the short sale and the foreclosures tie your money up for up to a year sometimes because lenders are trying to figure out what they want to do with this. We don't have enough inventory of foreclosures. Even with the percentage increase, we're still below normal numbers to where the lenders aren't trying to get them off the books to actually make a decision in any amount of time. So if you do have money to invest, are you going to tell a bank, here's my offer, and then not touch that money for 6 months or a year while they think about it?
Yeah, so what I want to jump into next is the real data. I want to take a look at a couple of graphs and charts here. So I'm going to go ahead and share the screen. All right, folks, so what we're looking at here is the U.S. historical foreclosure activity and rates over the last about 17 years. So this actually starts with 2005. I don't know why the year is cut off right here. We had some problem on the graph, but this is 2005. This is 2022. And what you can see is that the data is absolutely correct. If you compare 2022 to 2021, we have doubled what the actual foreclosure rate was. We went from 151,000 to 324,000. Now, I'm going to go ahead and let one of these guys go ahead and give their take as to maybe putting it into context with this data. So, Matt, will you explain what we're looking at here, contextualize it for us?
Yeah, I mean, basically what you're looking at is a typical market for foreclosures is going to average just under 1 million foreclosures a year. So about 80,000 a month is your typical market. Now, obviously going into cycles, you'll see upticks like you see in 7, 8, and 9, where each of those years were over 2 million foreclosures. Now, that being said, again, like I've always said, the worst years, there were 250 to 300,000 foreclosures a month. Now you look at 2022, it's 324,000 for the year. And that's in all markets across the entire country. And it should be noted that in 2022, they were legal to do them. In 2020 and 2021, there were parts of those years where they weren't legal to do, where you could not do a foreclosure. So even if you look at the last complete year where it wasn't ruled you can't do foreclosures, you still had 493. Now, while that 493,000 people were drastically impacted as individuals, that was across the entire country.
Right.
And that was in a market that was doing about 400,000 sales, 400 to 500,000 homes a month. So you're looking at 1 month supply when you look at that. The only time foreclosures became a real problem was back when it was flooding the market with inventory at 250 and 300,000 houses in supply. The market was only selling 300 to 400,000 houses a month. And people were on top of that putting in, 3, 4, 500,000 homes a month for sale. So what it really comes down to is boiling the ocean. It's a supply demand problem. And even when we start to see some of the numbers, because if you look at that average, it's about 493. If you looked at last pre-pandemic average, it was 493, but then 624 and 676. Those were coming down. So even if you take that 3-year average, you're looking at right around 575,000 homes. We still haven't come near that actually in almost 3 years. So I would expect that there's going to be an uptick. However, the change here is that there's a lot more equity. There isn't the horrible toxic debt. And so what's likely going to happen is we'll continue to see more foreclosures, but nothing. When you take foreclosures and you spread them over all 400 markets in the US, it's just not enough to make a difference. It's enough for a person to get a deal, but you know who it's likely going to be? It's likely going to be the person that actually knows how to do an off-market deal, because they're likely going to be able to have the conversation before that person's gone through a year-long foreclosure process, because you have 30, 60, 90 days late, then you have default, and then you have foreclosure proceedings starting. That means before you get your first foreclosure notice, you're 6 months in. It's going to take them some time to then work that through the book. So likely it's probably not going to be the 1,000 days that it was before, because there's not nearly that amount of inventory, but it's still going to be 7, 8, 9 months before you start to see that they're going to, because people will fight to keep their homes. They'll do everything they can. And you're going to see, and all you have to do is make usually some sort of a minimum payment to actually get them to take it off. Or you can contact and actually get a bigger payment made because maybe you sold some stuff. So there's just not going to be this massive deluge of foreclosures coming to the market.
Okay, so Dion, again, I want you to talk about pent-up demand, right? So if foreclosures, as you mentioned earlier with forbearance, if foreclosures were forced to be low, they were artificially forced to be lower than what they should have been. Is this a sign of a coming wave of inventory that's going to crash the market, or is it a return to normalcy, and a return to normalcy at a slower rate than what should be expected, given the numbers that Matt just talked about? We should actually, in a normal year, be higher than what we're at.
So I think the problem is and I'm going to have to basically quote Zuber on this. He had a video come out recently on the Crash Bros, right? The reason they're calling for the crash is because it gives people an excuse to do nothing. They can say, I've seen the comments. You guys have quoted the comments too. Someone on this channel says, thank you for the information on the coming crash. I'm really glad I didn't buy in the last 2 years. Like the level of missing intellect that it takes to think that missing out on several $100,000 in appreciation somehow was a good thing. And again, I'll quote, some markets are up, some markets are down. Our market here is only up 7% year over year, but we had 24% 2 years in a row. Imagine thinking, missing out on 24% appreciation for 2 years, and then still being 7% up year over year from 24% growth 2 times in a row would be a good thing to have missed. So let's say that foreclosures flood the market. Somehow there's a bunch of forced sellers, whatever the reason is, and the market crashes. We don't do anything different. We still hunt for good deals today that cash flow day one. We still are looking every day for the next deal to purchase. Even if we knew, and it's like Warren Buffett saying, if I knew the Fed rate in 2 years, it wouldn't impact how I was going to invest. If we knew that a crash was coming, if I knew literally prices were going to be 20% less a year from now, I would still be buying a great deal today.
Right.
Because I'm buying it for 5 or 10 or 20 years from now. Because in 2008, at the peak before the crash, who right now wouldn't love to pay 2008 prices?
Exactly.
In 2013, we would have loved to have paid 2008 prices. So yes, if you're thinking short term and you're going to sell a house in a year, you probably shouldn't buy no matter where the market's at.
Agreed.
The cost of selling is going to make it a negative deal for you. But if you're buy and hold for long term, and that's the problem that I have with where it's adversarial. If you have a Crash Bro and I want to say not Crash Bro talking, right? They're saying there's going to be a crash, and we're saying, who cares? We're not saying there isn't going to be a crash because they're going to call a reason out for a crash every 2 days because that's their revenue source, right? I haven't seen too many Crash Bros right now who own a bunch of real estate. You talk Graham Stephan, Meet Kevin, Chris Crone. They all say, here's my video on the crash, and then here's 15 minutes about why it's not going to be as bad as 2008. But then you have the people who own a house, maybe a rental because they're a forced landlord somehow, talking about the massive crash that's coming, and then they go buy a house, right? So even they're saying if the crash is coming, they're still going to buy. And then the comment in that video where he said, I'm going to go buy a house, commenter said, well, he's got a family to take care of. How does that tell you that giving somebody an excuse to take no action is still a good thing?
So I'm gonna touch on this briefly. So I do agree that there's a certain group of people out there who don't want to buy, that are hoping for a crash. And I think these are people who are wannabe investors. They don't want to do the work. They don't want to learn the market. There is also another group of people out there who have no desire to be an investor. They just want to own a home. And so for them, they're thinking, oh, I don't want to buy something. I don't want to overpay. What if I have to move in a couple of years? Because that is something that happens. As an investor, when I buy a property, I'm buying that thing for the long term. There's no, oh, my mom might get sick and I have to move across the country. There's no, oh, my job might move and I have to move for some reason. It's just, I'm going to own this house. It's going to be a rental property. But if you're a homeowner and you're thinking, I want to buy a house, but 2-3 years from now, something crazy might happen. Well, then, yeah, you do have to be a little more careful if you buy, because if there's going to be some significant life change that occurs, you don't want to have to sell in a down market. That's where I would encourage people, if you can wrap your head around the idea of if you have to move in a down market, don't sell, become an investor and rent it. Only if you made sure to buy a property that's actually where the rents cover the mortgage. It's going to be tougher in like California. Don't sell, rent it. And yeah, maybe you don't want to be a landlord. Well, just rent it for a few years until the market recovers and then sell. Have an exit plan other than just losing money, and have an exit plan other than just doing nothing, because a crash might happen. All right, one last look at the graph real quick so we can take a look at these numbers. I just want you to look at real quick. So we're at 0.23%. What this means is for every 100 housing units that there are, 0.23% of them are in foreclosure, okay? And in 2009 and in 2010, it was literally 10 times as much, 0.23 to 2.23. 10 times as many mortgages were in foreclosure in 2009 and 2010. And you can just see how much more inventory was coming on the market. And that is, if you go to a supply-demand curve or supply demand graph, when they intersect, if supply is skyrocketing, price has to come down. When I look at this, I don't see supply skyrocketing. I see what looks like a return to normalcy, as Matt mentioned earlier, maybe around the 500,000 foreclosures a year mark is normalcy. Even if we go past 500,000, how much past it do we have to get before we hit these unsustainable numbers? I would say we can probably go from 500,000 all the way up to the $1 million mark, because this was 2016, 2017. It wasn't like we were in a terrible housing market even at that point. So we really have to come way up here to the 2012, 2010, 11, 12 numbers of like 1.5 million before I would be able to say, okay, I'm concerned that there's a level of foreclosures occurring that are not sustainable. Anyways, fellas, I appreciate you being here, having this conversation. I definitely think that people who are homeowners versus people who want to be investors look at it from different perspectives, but a homeowner would benefit from looking at the market as if they were an investor, even if they don't want to be one. Matt, where can people find you?
You can find me on Lumberjack Landlord on Instagram as well as on YouTube. And I've got one closing thought for you, which is, if you actually believe that the Crash Bros are here for you and they're just mucking along just like you are, trying to find their home, ask them to demonetize their channel. We'll see how much they're there for you. Because if they're really there for the people, then shut off monetization and just be there for the people because you're doing an altruistic thing. Then I'll believe that you're really there for the people.
And Dion, any final challenges and where can people find you?
So not that I'm trying to one up Matt, but I'm going to talk about two things in closing thoughts. The first thing, you make a really good point with the home buyer versus investor mindset, right? There's a different person that we're talking to. So if you're on a channel and you see the Lumberjack Landlord and financial freedom and one rental at a time, and you're talking about having 10 plus units in a distance where you're growing, and you're watching this content because you want to become a home buyer, you might be on the wrong channel. That's the first thought. Second thought, foreclosures right now, if they tripled, would be around that 1 million point, right?
Uh-huh.
If unemployment right now tripled, I might be concerned. So foreclosures would have to triple, unemployment would have to triple. Everybody keeps talking about these massive layoffs. Unemployment is at a lower rate than it has been in any of our lives, even the oldest one here's lifespan. It has never been this low before. So record low numbers, a percentage increase is going to sound like a massive increase, but it's still going to be rookie numbers that they need to work on.
Gotta pump those numbers up. All right, fellas, appreciate you being here, and we'll see you next time. Yeah, and Dion, we want to get your thoughts while you're over there being blinded by the light.
Yeah, I'm sorry to give you more to edit out in the future, Mike, but Nature's Ring Light came out in Washington, which is super rare, so I'm going to fix that.
Go ahead.